factions in the Air Force who see that the natural extension of the Air Force is to become a space force. It's a relatively small minority in the U.S. defense establishment, but it's had an unusual amount of sway.
Names?
Names associated with this? Well, there's the general who's head of the U.S. Space Command. He's a big advocate of this. You have to look at places like the American Enterprise Institute and the Heritage Foundation, sort of the normal suspects. Baker Springs at the Heritage Foundation is an advocate of this.
And the weapons manufacturers that are pushing this? And
it's not really a sort of a military-industrial complex push. I mean, there's money to be made here, but there's money to be made everywhere. So Boeing, Lockheed, Raytheon all have substantial space contracts, but they also have contracts on land, ground, and sea systems as well.
Is any other country looking at nukes in space?
No other country. Where you do get some competition is from China, for example, which has a relatively small space presence, but just last year tested an anti-satellite weapon. And so there's concern that if the U.S. makes this a push, China will match it and could someday surpass the United States in this area.
Is there any push for treaties against nuclear weapons?
There
in
is.
space?
There's been efforts to negotiate what they call the peaceful uses of outer space for some time. It's been tied up in knots at Geneva, where these treaties are usually negotiated. There's many experts, some of whom the Ploughshares Fund helps finance, advocate a sort of rules of the road for space. Because see, we do a lot of business in space. Almost every time you use the ATM machine, that signal is being transmitted through satellites. Most of our communications, the GPS units that you have are all based in space. So there's a big financial interest in keeping that a peaceful place where people can do business, not disrupting those satellites by anti-satellite activity that could damage far more than the intended target. So there's this push to negotiate a peaceful use of outer space treaty. I'm actually fairly optimistic that the next administration could take this up as one of its signature policies.
Who's disrupting a treaty around nuclear weapons and against nuclear weapons in space?
Well, you'd have to, neither the Clinton administration nor the Bush administration were very interested in negotiating this. As more and more countries start entering space use, start launching their own satellites, the pressure is growing on U.S. businesses and therefore the U.S. government to negotiate a rules of the road agreement.
Let me ask you about a headline we had a few days ago about a leaked U.S. Air Force review that found major security flaws in most U.S. bases storing nuclear weapons in Europe. The probe was launched after an incident last August in which a B-52 bomber inadvertently carried nuclear warheads on a cross-country flight. At some bases, nuclear weapons were found to be guarded by private security guards and U.S. soldiers with just months of experience. The report calling for reducing the number of nuclear weapons in Europe to reduce vulnerabilities at overseas locations.
Yeah, two things about that. One, this is an excellent example of the role of non-government organizations. This particular study was unearthed by the Federation of American Scientists, a guy named Hans Christensen there, just doing his work, doing his job, came up with it, released it, gave the public the information they know. And the second is what it shows, that as long as you have these weapons just sitting around, bad things are going to happen. The military no longer is very interested in nuclear weapons. In fact, some of the advocates for eliminating nuclear weapons are military commanders who see that these weapons are no longer essential to U.S. national security, but we have thousands of them. So what happens is they're basically warehoused, and the prestige is lost for these weapons. You don't get advanced in your career on a nuclear path the way you used to, and the care and tending of these weapons is deteriorating. So we have a situation where last summer we had 6 nuclear bombs, the equivalent of 60 Hiroshimas, loaded on a B-52 and flown across the country, and nobody knew they were there. They sat on the tarmac for almost 36 hours unguarded by any special troops and just a chain-link fence protecting them. If that's happening in our country, imagine what's happening in Russia or in Pakistan. These weapons are a danger wherever they are, whoever has them.
What has to be done?
You have to reduce and eliminate these weapons. It's going to take a while, but we've done that with chemical weapons. We're doing it with biological weapons. We've taken on far greater national security challenges and met them. I think the task for the next President of the United States is to do exactly what senior leaders are now urging him to do, reaffirm the goal of the elimination of nuclear weapons and marry that up with a series of practical steps, reductions in the U.S. arsenal. We can get down to the low hundreds. Bans on any nuclear tests, stop producing any more nuclear material, and most of all, negotiate with the other nuclear powers or would-be nuclear powers. Bring them into the new kind of security regime that we want to see.
Are you concerned about nuclear power being raised again as a potential alternative to the exploitation of oil?
Yeah, well, as you know, nuclear power has been around for almost 60 years now. It was the twin of the nuclear bomb threat was the promise of nuclear energy. But the four major problems that appeared right away are still unresolved. Cost, still extremely expensive. Safety, an accident in a nuclear plant is far worse than an accident in a coal plant. Waste, we still don't know what to do with the stuff. And finally, proliferation. It's not the reactor that you're worried about. It's the stuff that goes into the reactor and the stuff that goes out. The same facility that can enrich uranium for fuel rods can enrich uranium for nuclear weapons. This is the whole issue with Iran. They have an enrichment facility they say is for making fuel. Do you trust them? And if nuclear power is going to expand in the world, if we're going to double or triple the nuclear reactors, then we're going to double or triple the fuel factories. And these could spread to many other countries, bringing many other countries right up to the brink of nuclear weapon status. That's an unacceptable threat. I actually think it's immoral for companies and for countries to be promoting the expansion of nuclear power without taking steps to correct that national ownership of fuel facilities. The only way we're going to be safe, if there is a role for nuclear power, it's got to be married with an internationalization of those fuel fabrication facilities.
Well, we will leave it there. Joseph Cirincione, thank you very much for being with us, president of the Ploughshares Fund, a global security foundation focused on nuclear weapons policy and conflict resolution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amy. My pleasure.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. We're in Aspen, Colorado. We'll be back with the playwright and author and actress Anna Deavere Smith. Stay with us.
Please tell me the reason behind the colors that you fly. Please tell me the reason you want us to unify. You say you're sorry, said there is no other choice. But how can you feel sorry when you kill people with no voice? We can chase down all our enemies, bring them to their knees. We can bomb the world to pieces, but we can't bomb it into peace. Or we may even find a solution to hunger and disease. We can bomb the world to pieces, but we can't bomb it into peace. The earthquake of anger simply brings more of the same. Military madness, the smell of flesh and burning pain. So I sing out to the masses, stand up if you're still sane. To all of us gone crazy,